Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, where in today's video we are going to be continuing Neon Genesis Evangelion Redemption Book 1, What If Shinji Went Back in Time, Part 5. As always, if you're new to the channel or if you're a regular and you enjoy what we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. We have now reached the halfway point of Book 1 of What If Shinji Went Back in Time. In this story, we delve into a different Evangelion possibility. What if Shinji had been given a second chance to right his wrongs? However, doing so comes with a price. As with time travel, things never go the way you think they will. For everything that Shinji has experienced, there are little and major changes that are occurring all around him. Just when he thinks he has all the answers, it seems as though fate decides to change the questions. How will Shinji combat these new and changing forces that surround him? And much more so, how will Shinji's new attitude affect the people around him as well? As he gains more respect and admiration, he also gains an ever-growing target on his back, as forces in the shadows continue to make their work in their attempts for their own sinister plots. For all this and more, stay tuned and listen as we now continue Neon Genesis Evangelion Redemption, Book 1, Part 5, What If Shinji Went Back in Time? As always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Shinji could feel a change. He wasn't entirely sure of why, but it was just something that he could feel. If not for the literal ticking time bomb that was his own body, that could go out at any moment if he pushed himself too far 3 more times, there was also the growing tension of a few members of his team. One of them being Toji Suzuhara. For one, his Eva was taking the longest to arrive. Even Mari's Evangelion would have made it here by now. Hers being Eva Unit 5 that came from England. It was eventually dropped off not too much later after her arrival. That meant that 5 out of the 6 pilots all had their Evas. Everyone except for Toji. He was growing more and more impatient day by day. He went through regular training like everyone else just fine, but when it came to actual combat, he couldn't actually do anything. Of course, Shinji could understand the anticipation that was growing inside of him, but at the same time he tried to calm his friend whenever possible, trying to assure him that his Eva would come in due time, and that they didn't want to make any mistakes. After all, it was better to just be on the ground than be in a faulty Evangelion. In the end, it wouldn't do anyone any good if his Eva turned on him. Of course, Shinji saying those words, he would immediately think of the past. He remembered what happened to Toji in his original time, and the unfortunate accident that came as a result of using Eva Unit 4. Shinji wanted to avoid that at all costs, and still, if it meant that it was taking longer for it to arrive, then it meant things had to be changing. The angels weren't attacking in the same order they had once before, but apparently that was to be expected. And also, certain events weren't taking place the same way as before either. And then there was Mari. Shinji was trying to figure her out. There was something off about her. From the time that Third Impact had occurred, there wasn't anything about Mari when everyone was joined together in the LCL. Did she always exist, or was she a byproduct of going back in time? He wasn't entirely sure. He had spoken to her briefly on a few occasions, and she always seemed to have this look towards him. A look as though she knew him in a way, more so than he would have liked. Of course, she was happy and outgoing. Apparently, she came from Nerve's branch in England, and it seemed as though everyone knew of her in this world. So, that all seemed to be on the up and up. But at the same time, Shinji couldn't be entirely sure. To be honest, in all of his escapades so far, she was genuinely the one anomaly. He didn't know why she was here, or where she had even come from for that matter. The only thing he knew for sure was that he'd have to keep his eyes on everything for now. Of course, even while they were all Eva pilots, they still had to carry on with their regular lives. That meant school. And for Misato, being their guardian, she had to attend parent-teacher conference for all 6 of them. Of course, when Misato arrived, it didn't take her long to become popular with the boys, to say the least. Misato sitting with the teacher, as she would have to take notes on all 6 pilots and on how they were doing. Shinji and Asuka, of course, were top students, along with Rei. They seemed to be doing the best out of the 6. Shinji being first, Rei and Asuka following behind in a close second. The only thing holding Asuka back was her use of Japanese kanji, but she was a fast learner, so she could pick it up in due time. Toji and Kinsuke, they had their strengths and weaknesses in various subjects, so they might need a little more tutoring. As for Mari, well, she was a bit all over the place. She was smart when she wanted to be, and well, whenever there was something she didn't care about, she just didn't care about it. Which meant that Misato would have to probably take some more time to try to reel her in and make sure that her work got done. But for the most part, all 6 seemed to carry along and do fine. So she was grateful. The teacher remarking that Misato was like a mother cub looking after her kin. And that got her thinking for a moment. In the meantime, the children would learn the truth of second impact, learning that it wasn't actually what the world had told them it was, and that it wasn't caused by some strange event in the Antarctic, but it was actually caused by an angel. It was in the destruction of Antarctica that second impact had occurred. Shinji, of course, knew this truth, and it wasn't lost on anyone, though. But he had to try to put up a front. He couldn't look as though he weren't shocked to hear this news, since it was supposed to be a revelation for everyone. But this was something Shinji was very aware of. It was why he was here in the first place, to stop third impact from happening, even though he hadn't been able to do so the first time around. Of course, there was another matter, one that Shinji was surprised would actually call to his attention. He stood in front of the mirror as he was getting himself dressed. He wore a standard Nerve suit, one that looked almost identical to the one his father wore. Although he didn't wear a pair of gloves, he still would put on his sunglasses none the same. In fact, you could argue that he kind of looked like a tiny version of Gendo, as he had his badges already attached to the side of his coat. As he was adjusting his tie, Asuka would move along and help him straighten it out a bit. He thanked her, as Asuka was wearing a standard Nerve dress along with a commanding jacket as well. All of the girls were dressed, along with the boys, although Shinji's suit was different from theirs. While the other girls and boys had a standard gray Nerve uniform, Shinji's was black, indicating his status as the captain. And Misato, she was dressed in her best attire as well. You see, the children were being taken along to a special presentation from the Japanese heavy chemical industries. It was going to be the debut of their new fighting machine, the Jet Alone. a bipedal robot developed to be used as a replacement for the Evangelions. This company believing that the Evas were too unpredictable, and that having something all mechanical, it avoided the need for any weakness. Of course, at the presentation, Ritsuko would be there as well, as they were all invited for the demonstration. But the reason why they were also invited was because of how much notoriety this Evangelion team had been getting. You see, unlike in the original timeline, Shinji, because of his precognition and being the commander that he was, it meant that NERV was seeing a lot more success. This came not just in the form of defeating the angels, but it also came in the form of collateral damage, which was estimated to be a lot higher. Shinji managed to keep relatively low. Sure, some buildings still got destroyed, and there were many things that had to be repaired. But honestly, in terms of finance, Shinji had probably saved NERV a lot more money. That was also probably the reason why they had no problem paying the pilots 2 million yen each for each pilot every month that they were employed. It was pretty much chump change for NERV in the grand scheme of things given the budget that they had. But also, because they were able to keep all of the damage and everything else down to a minimum, they could justify giving out such large payments without any real concern. Of course, the leader of Jet Alone, the developer, Shiro Tokita, was speaking highly of his new machine. Even with Ritsuko giving her pushback, he would laugh them off. But his attention fell mainly to Shinji, as he called up the young pilot to the podium, as he wanted to have some discussion along with the other representatives who were watching as well. So, you are the infamous Shinji Ikari that we have been hearing so much about. The commander of this little play club you have here? I wouldn't call it a play club, sir. I like to think that we all take our jobs very seriously. I'm sure you do. Playing around with those colorful, oversized toys of yours. They're not toys. They are weapons of war, and they are treated as such. You speak with someone of great wisdom. Do tell, what do you think of the Jet Alone? And how do you think it compares to your Evangelions? Well, for starters, as Dr. Ritsuko had stated before, your Jet Alone does not produce an AT field, one that will be very crucial in the fight against the angels. Something that we can develop in time. It's an issue that's of no real concern. Do you really think that having an AT field will make a difference? This human component that you campaign for within your Evangelions, many could see it as being more of a weakness than an asset. A machine is calculated, it's precise, it does not make mistakes. It always gets the job done. Do you really think that you, with human error, could possibly do better? Shinji thought about it for a moment. But then he looked towards Toji. He looked towards the others. Asuka and Misato were getting highly upset. They didn't like how this man was speaking down to them, especially to Shinji, after everything he had done. They had seen firsthand what Shinji was capable of doing. Shinji, however, after taking a deep breath, looked towards the officer. Do you have family, sir? I do. And let me ask you, if I told you right now that an angel was going to be attacking where your family was, but that I could defeat it at the cost of your family's life, do you think that I would have done the right thing? And what exactly are you getting at, boy? What I'm getting at is that your machine, even if you believe it has no flaws, I like to think that the human component is the most important part of the Evangelion. The human element of it all is what keeps us from being like the angels. Mindless monsters that only execute orders when given. I will admit your jet alone is impressive, but it also poses many dangers. For one, it's practically a walking nuclear bomb that, when not handled properly, could cause a lot more damage if it were to fall in battle than an Evangelion were to fall. Also, there's the lack of a human element. It means that the jet alone will only follow its natural given orders down to the very end, without taking into consideration many different factors. For example, what do you do in a fight against an angel, and there happen to be civilians in the way? What do you do when you're fighting in a confined space? What do you do when things don't go in your favor? These are split-second decisions that have to be made on a dime, and even for the fastest machine, they cannot take into account the lives lost and the toll that will be paid. Fighting is not just about the end result, and nor is it just about the victory. It is about the lives that will be affected every time you go into combat. When I step out into the battlefield, I'm not just thinking about my objective to defeat the enemy. I also think about the lives and everyone else who is going to be affected, from my teammates to my officers to the civilians. Sure, if it's just about getting results, if it's just about getting the job done, the Evas are more than equipped to handle that. So is the jet alone. But let me ask you, if you were hunting out in the field, would you drop a nuclear bomb to catch a rabbit? Many in the crowd would start to laugh at this remark. Even Asuka would smirk, and Misato would look on like a proud mother. Even Shiro was starting to become a bit tense at Shinji's reasoning. No, you wouldn't. That's the difference between you and me. In the end of the day, it's the human element that allows me to save more lives. And if it wasn't for that, I'd be no different than the enemies that I fight. Many in the crowd would applaud Shinji's comments, as they understood where he was coming from, and he spoke as someone with wisdom beyond his years. Of course, this only meant that the jet alone had to perform even higher than originally anticipated. And of course, just as Shinji feared, the jet alone would eventually go off track. Now, they had to stop it as quickly as possible, and they were only able to bring one Eva unit with them. In case of such an event, Eva Unit 1 was taken along, the others being kept at base. As such, Shinji would load into his Evangelion along with Misato, as they had no choice but to try to shut down the jet alone before it could cause any real damage. Of course, as they were preparing, Shinji and Misato would go over the game plan, the others looking to help everyone evacuate from the main hall, and they were hoping that Shinji could take care of things on his own. In the midst of their planning though, as Misato was going over the details, Shinji would correct her at one point. Of course, Misato was worried about the safety of everyone else in this operation, but Shinji made it very clear that he was concerned about her life as well, and that under no circumstances was he going to allow her to be in a situation where she might compromise that. Misato was honestly surprised by Shinji's words, and they weren't spoken out of just a fear, but there was love within what he said, as the love for a child who cares for its parent, a love for family, and for Shinji, that was what Misato was to him. As such, they would go through with their plan, Misato going on the inside with the codes needed to shut down the jet alone, while Shinji fought it on the outside, using all of his strength to hold it in place and to keep it from escaping. While it was touch and go for a moment, Misato was able to shut down the jet alone, before its cooling system could be undone, and before the nuclear core could self-destruct. At the worst case, a nuclear blast had been prevented, but still, that thing was going to go one way or another. Once Misato was evacuated, Shinji would make sure that she was moved to safety, before eventually taking on the jet alone, containing it with his AT field as the blast erupted, keeping it contained down to a minimum, although Eva Unit 1 would suffer some damage as it was blown back. Thankfully enough, Shinji didn't have to go overboard, but still he could feel his head ringing from the damage. He could feel his chest caving in. That had been too close. He had almost flirted with going over 100% in that moment, and he could feel the repercussions. All the same, Shinji would get contact from everyone else. The damage had been kept to a minimum and no one was harmed. Grateful and happy that everyone was okay, Shinji would give a form of confirmation before he closed his eyes. The last thing he heard was everyone yelling out his name as he passed out inside of the cockpit of Eva Unit 1. The only thing she could see was destruction. Destruction in every which way. She remembered being placed inside of a pod and seeing the door seal above her. The last image she had of her father, as he had protected and saved her life from third impact. However, it came at the cost of his own. Misato would instantly awaken from her nightmare, from reliving the horrors that were second impact. She looked around to see that she were in a hospital chair outside of a waiting room. Immediately she rose to her feet, along with the others who were slowly stirring. As they made their way into the room, they saw Shinji were recovering. He had had a concussion and had passed out briefly for a few hours, although thankfully he were fine for the most part. As he had awoken, everyone would rush into the room, Kensuke and Toji patting him on the back and telling him that he was crazy to try to fend off a bomb like that by himself, and they had wished that they had all brought their Eva so that they could help. Even Mari looked deeply concerned. Asuka was, well, she was a mixed bag of emotions. She wasn't sure how to feel in this situation, but it dawned on her from time to time that she almost lost Shinji, and for some reason that really bothered her. And then there was Rei. Of course, she was still quiet and reserved, but even she gave off a strong sigh of relief, happy to know that her brother was still alive. Misato seeing the kids all huddled together around Shinji like this, it caused something to stir within her heart. She started to think of her own father, of the relationship that they had, or lack thereof. Her father was a scientist, a talented one, but for all of his talents as a scientist, he was horrible as a father. He was almost never around. He nearly abandoned them every chance they had. Misato remembered her mother crying herself to sleep at night and ultimately being pushed to the point of getting a divorce. Of course, Misato never actually reconciled with her father, but that only made his sacrifice during the events of Second Impact all the more bewildering. Just how exactly was she supposed to feel about him now? Why had she joined NERV? Why was she doing what she did? Her vendetta, her fight against the Angels, everything she did up until now. It almost felt like in a way she was still living up to the legacy of a man that she knew she hated, but that she felt she couldn't deep down. I mean, her father wasn't a monster. He didn't abuse his family or anything like that. No, he just was never there. Not to excuse his actions, but at the same time, she wondered how on earth she could reconcile with that, and then with the growing feeling she had now. Day by day, she came to grow closer to these kids. She saw all of them as her own in a way. Of course, they all had their own parents, their own families, and everything else besides that, but Misato truly felt as though she were connected to all of them. Shinji was the tough and oldest, the responsible one, if you will, of the team. Then there was Toji, who was the muscle, Kinsuke, who acted as the brains, Mari, who could tend to be a free spirit, Rei, who was the calm and collected one, and then there was Asuka, the rather self-confident overachiever, who was always willing to push herself beyond. She saw qualities that she adored in all of them, and honestly, she had gotten to a point where she couldn't imagine what her life would be like if she lost a single one of them. Sure, at the start, she recognized that this was all for the fate of the world. After all, this wasn't something that could be taken lightly. She knew for a fact that at any given moment, at any given time, they could all lose their lives. One of them, two of them, three of them, four of them, maybe all of them, at any given point. And at the start, she always knew how to bury those feelings whenever it came to a mission, but now she got to a point where she didn't feel right sending them out like this. Every time she sent those kids out to a mission, she pretty much condemned them to a potential death. Even if she wasn't the one that killed them, she felt as though she might as well be the one that pulled the trigger. Of course, this whole situation was morbid in the grand scheme of things. Why were children the only ones capable of piloting the Evangelions? If they could get adults to do it, then they should have done so. None of this felt right. But of course, this was just Misato speaking, though. This was because she had gotten too attached. Even the kindness and nerve recognized the true dire straits of it all. Of course, no one was truly heartless. They still tried to have empathy and, to a sense, sympathy and understanding, but in the end, they knew that this had to be done. I guess the only thing that really ever kept them from worrying too much was the simple fact that these children all had free will. None of them had to be pilots. That was something that was made very clear. Granted, trying to find more was a process that wasn't easily fixable. The fact that they had been able to find 6 was actually a miracle in and of itself, but if other pilots had to be found, it could be done. Of course, that's assuming that they would have the time. The events between Second Impact and the arrival of the Angels once again was 15 years, but who was to say that they would have that much time? For all they knew, a potential next crop of pilots might not have even been born yet, and there was no telling if the enemy was going to give them that amount of time to find out. No, this was honestly the best case scenario. The best case of having at least enough pilots to fight. Even if they lost some, they knew they could still keep going. But Misato didn't like this. She didn't like the idea of using them like spare tires to a car. They weren't just things that could be tossed aside. They were children, each one with a life of their own, one that could blossom into anything. And the very idea that that very delicate life could be snuffed, and that she would have to bear the responsibility of being the one that did it, it affected her deeply. And for Shinji himself, he felt as though he could pick up on this. Of course, though, he felt and understood her greatly. In his own way, he knew what it was like to experience loss also. And he'd be lying if he said he didn't want to go through it again. In fact, if he could do all of it on his own, then he would. And in fact, that was something he would want to try to do at any point in time. Before long, Misato would be promoted to Major. And now, with 5 of the 6 Evangelions, the only thing that was left to do now was focus on getting Eva Unit 4, which was actually scheduled to arrive very soon. Toji was excited as soon he was going to be joining the team, but for now, they could focus on polishing up his piloting skills. After all, his sync ratio was dropping and fluctuating from time to time, so Ritsuko made it her job to make sure that Toji would be up to snuff when his time came to be a pilot. And for now, everyone else would mainly focus on combat training, as well as preparing to work as a team. Shinji would be a bit overwhelmed by it all. After all, when the time that he had come from, there were only 3 pilots. Toji being a pilot didn't work out all that well. But now they had Kintsuke and they had Mari too. Shinji was able to pick up on the strengths and the weaknesses of each pilot, seeing what they were capable of. When it came to Kintsuke and Rei, they were honestly the best shooters that they had on the team, and that was the role they were appointed to. As for Mari and Toji, they were the best when it came to hand-to-hand combat. Even fighting with the use of a weapon, they preferred to use the protractor knives instead of the guns, so they were used for close range. Of course, when Toji arrived, he would be the partner for Mari. And then finally, there was Shinji and Asuka. They were a mixed bag. In terms of being a pure pilot, they were absolutely the best of the best. They didn't specialize in any one particular area, although if there was anything that made them stand out, it was the fact that their AT fields were the strongest of the 6, their sync ratios being the highest of them all, with Asuka being around the 85 to 90 range, and Shinji constantly keeping himself within the 90 range. They were definitely the highest potentialed pilots of all 6, so they served the role of being in the point, the place in between. They could serve a defensive or an offensive capacity, whatever was needed. In the meantime, there were other developments taking place as well. As before long, there would be the arrival of yet another attack. This would come in the form of yet another angel, one that Shinji was also familiar with. The flying angel, the 8th, Sahaquiel. It was a flying angel that had a large eye, connected to 2 other eyes that acted as wings. It shot off a strong blast from the sky above, and judging from its pattern, Shinji could tell that it was aiming right towards Nerve. Of course, Misato would still come up with her plan from the original. The plan being for the 5 Eva pilots now to create an AT field over the spot that was going to be hit next. They would use it to blast back the angel before it could touch down, and they would use their AT fields to open and destroy it. Of course, now having 2 extra pilots to help them, Shinji believed that this mission should go by a lot more smoother. And from the start, it actually did. Having the 5 of them work together and using their AT fields and spreading them out evenly, they were able to catch it before it could touch down. Both Asuka and Shinji would use their AT fields to attack it, opening it open long enough for Mari to go in with her knife, stabbing it through its core and attempting to destroy it. However, Shinji could feel that something was off. He wasn't entirely sure of what, nor was he sure of why. But for whatever reason, it didn't die so easily. Sure, it seemed to have keeled over, and everyone thought that everything was fine. Asuka commenting that that was the easiest fight they had had yet, and it was almost like they weren't trying at all. But Shinji could hear something, like a whisper. It was in another dialect and he couldn't make it out completely. His mother, who was also connected to him through Ava Unit 1, would comment on the sound as well, as Shinji realized it was coming from the dead beast that they had killed. He realized that it was in fact still alive. Without warning, he yelled for everyone to get back. Rei was the closest to the beast and she had her back turned. Shinji and Ava Unit 1 would push Ava Unit 0 out of the way, as he spread his AT field as far as he could, raising it to its absolute max. Before Misato had a chance to even scream, The screen would shine brightly as a large explosion occurred. One that very well should have destroyed the city. This blast was unlike anything that they had seen. As the stumbling started to stop, as the rumblings began to shake, everyone at Nerve would be in a panic. If that blast was as strong as they thought it was, then to Misato's own fear, there should be 5 dead pilots right now. But as everything started to become more visible to them, what Misato saw next was something that left her in awe. The other pilots all looked up to see that they were not dead. In fact, they hadn't even been hit. Ava Unit 1 was standing before them, his arms spread out wide, but the front of it had been destroyed. It was steaming. They had never seen an Ava be damaged this much before. Asuka and Rei would both yell out to Shinji immediately, who said nothing. He had raised his AT field past 100%. That blast was not a normal one. It wasn't like the one that came the first time around. No, it was delayed. It was almost as if the enemy had tried to lull them into a false sense of security to take them all out at once. And if Shinji hadn't caught it at the last moment, it would have been the end of them. He had used his AT field to contain the blast himself, a feat that was truly remarkable. But still, it was one that did not go without consequence, as when they tried to speak to Shinji, he was not responsive. Even Shinji's own mother within the consciousness of Ava Unit 1 could not get him to awaken. The only thing Shinji could feel now was pain. A strong pain in his chest, as if a part of him had just vanished. To where he had no idea, but he didn't feel whole anymore. Before long, Shinji would awaken in the hospital, once again surrounded by his friends and close ones who were all worried about him, Misato being the most worried of them all. Eventually, Shinji would assure everyone that he were fine. Misato, however, stayed for a while, sitting on his bed beside him as the two of them talked. Shinji. Yes, Misato? You know, you truly are an amazing boy. Thank you. That being said, Misato would feel tears beginning to well up in her eyes. Misato, what's wrong? It's nothing. It's just, I really am a lousy caretaker, aren't I? I can't cook. I'm an absolute slob. I leave everything to you kids all the time. And even now, I almost lost all of you. If it wasn't for you, Shinji, I don't think I could. Shinji would pull her into a hug. He was weak. After all, he was still recovering. But even still, he assured her that everything was fine. Misato, I never really knew my mother. And I know I probably don't have any right to say this, but I like to think of you as my mother. You've welcomed me. You've taken me in. You've done so much for me that, honestly, I could never repay you. Really, I'm sorry I make you worry so much. I just don't want to lose any of you. Misato was taken aback by these words. The idea that Shinji actually saw her as his mother, and that he actually looked to her in that light. It only restored the waningness of her spirit. Misato knew that she had to be better. She had to do better. After all, she had been promoted to major for a reason. Whenever those kids went out into battle, she was the one that watched over them. And she was going to make sure that she did her best, that no matter what the situation, everyone would come home alive. In the meantime, as a following week would pass by, Shinji would be discharged from the hospital and the anniversary would finally arrive. The anniversary of his mother's death. Shinji would visit the gravestone with his father Gendo. The meeting being a lot different for both of them. For Gendo, from what he had seen and heard, his son was not the same. And it was something he had to take note of. Shinji. Yes, father? I heard of how you handled yourself during the Jet Alone incident, as well as the fight with the Eighth Angel. Good work. Thank you, father. You've changed, Shinji. You think so? Yes. I didn't want to admit it at first, but you are definitely not the same boy from 3 years ago. You don't cry, nor do you complain. I can tell that you don't like everything that goes on, but still, you put your head down and you get to work. You're reliable and dependable. And honestly, you're everything that this organization needs. I see a lot of her inside of you. Thank you. Although, if I'm being honest, I don't remember much about my mother, if anything at all. And I must say, to hear that coming from you, it leaves me feeling a bit mixed. Understandable. I know that I'm not on your favorite list of people. If I'm being honest, father, that really doesn't matter to me anymore. It doesn't? No. I'm not gonna pretend like you and I have the best of relationships. Let's just be honest. You are a horrible father. But that's besides the point. You do what you feel you need to do. You felt that this was just something that you had to do. And at the very least, you've had the conviction to stick by it for all this time. Truthfully, whatever happens about or to us now, I really don't know. Although, at the very least, Shinji kept his head down, not facing him, as he finished. I would like to hope that at the very least, I wasn't too much of a disappointment to you. I hope that, at least for what I do now, I mean something. Of course, whether I do or don't, it really doesn't matter to me. In the end, you have what you have to fight for, and I have mine. Gendo wasn't sure of how to respond to that. What exactly could he say? There wasn't anything to refute. There was nothing to dispute. In the end, Shinji had made his intentions very clear. Whether or not they had a relationship, that was on him. Whatever happened from here on out, it was on him as well. Shinji wasn't going to hold anger or resentment against him. But at the same time, Shinji wasn't going to let what his father did or didn't do affect him. If his father wanted to be in his life, if he wanted to try, that was on him. If he did or didn't, Shinji just didn't care. Shinji had come to learn that there was more to life than just simple relationships. That more often than not, we spend so much time focused on one thing, trying to gain and achieve one thing, that we lose sight on what's been most important all along. For Shinji, He had already lived one life, desperately trying to gain his father's approval. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it seeking the validation of a man who was hardly ever around to begin with. If Gendo cared, he could say it, or not. It made no difference. The sun still set, the moon still rise. It still rained regardless. The seasons changed, the years flew by. Life goes on. That was the conclusion that Shinji came to. When his father abandoned him, life went on. The world doesn't stop spinning for your problems. Not for anyone. So why should Shinji sit around and feel sorry for himself because one person didn't give him the time of day? There were still other people, like Misato, Rei, Asuka, Toji, Kensuke, Mari, the others at school, the other people at Nerve, everyone, people who wanted to be in his life, and people who cared about him. He had more than he could ever ask for, and he had what he had to protect. So for now, things were just going to be where they were. Although as Gendo left, Shinji would look back towards him. "Father." "Yes, Shinji. For what it's worth, I'm glad you and I had this time together." "I as well. I'm glad that we could meet." Gendo would leave off to take care of other business, and Shinji, he would return home. Before leaving though, Misato would tell Shinji that she were going to be going out to a wedding along with Kaji and Ritsuko. Kaji had arrived to pick up Misato, although Misato was still getting dressed and finishing up a few things. Asuka had gone out on a date since Hikari had found a guy that really wanted to take her out. Mari, she was off, doing her own thing for the time being, although she had stopped to talk to Asuka about her date, teasing her about the fact that she probably wished it was Shinji, and Asuka, being tired of Mari and her teasing, would simply tell her to shut up. Kensuke actually worked up the nerve to ask Rei to go out with him. Not like a date or anything, but just to spend some time. And Shinji made it very clear that if Kensuke did anything to his sister that he wouldn't approve of, well, Kensuke was going to need a new pair of glasses. As for Toji, he was using the time off to go and visit his family. They lived in another city, and well, because of Toji and his role in Nerve, he didn't get to see them as often. Although, thankfully, the funds that he did make, it meant that he could actually afford to provide for his family to live somewhere a bit more comfortable, and at least live in another part of Japan that wasn't going to be under Angel attack constantly. And as for Shinji, well, he was home alone. He decided to take the time to dust off the old cello and play a tune. As he did so, just as he anticipated, Asuka would make her way home, commenting that the date wasn't at all what she thought it'd be. She asked where Misato was, and Shinji would explain. Although, much to his surprise, when she learned that Misato was away with Kaji, it didn't bother her as much. Yeah, she was a bit bummed out about it, but she didn't really care. That was strange. Of course, Asuka would still comment Shinji's playing skills, and Shinji would modestly say that it was just something he enjoyed doing. Of course, when he first started playing, it was simply because someone told him to, and maybe if no one had told him to stop, he would have just kept playing, without any regard. But he told Asuka that, over time, he came to enjoy it. He found joy playing this music. Of course, Asuka would ask what exactly he enjoyed to play, and Shinji simply stated that he liked to play what was on his heart. Asuka would comment that it sounded a bit sad. And for Shinji, he understood why it might feel that way. But in the end, that was just how the music came out. Of course, the two would be alone for a bit, as Asuka would nervously ask if Shinji had ever kissed that girl, referring to the girl that Shinji had spoken about, the girl that he had lost. Although, unknown to Asuka, the very girl that he was speaking of was her in another point in time in his life. Yeah, we kissed. How was it? Well, I remember not being able to breathe. She pinched my nose and, well, wouldn't allow me to do much. That sounds awful. Did you have bad breath or something? No, I did not. She was just, well, I don't know. She wanted to try to just forget about someone else. I think that's the only reason she kissed me. Well, that sounds rather selfish. No, she just had a troubled past. You know, this girl that you used to like really sounds like a piece of work. You have no idea. Well, what do you think if maybe... Is there something you're trying to ask me? I just wondered, well, maybe I could do better. Are you asking me to... Look, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. Who says I didn't want to? You're just that casual about it, Shinji? Well, I mean, a beautiful girl's asking me, so why wouldn't I be? You think I'm... Don't try to psych me out like that. You think you're just some old Casanova, don't you, Captain? Aw, don't be intimidated by the title, Asuka. I'm not intimidated. After all, it's not like I just go around kissing anyone. I never said you did. Good, and know that I don't. Well, do you want to? I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it. The two of them would walk to one another, Shinji remembering very much how this played the first time, but now there was a stronger sense of confidence within him, one that allowed him not to falter so easily. With that, as the two of them drew closer to one another, their faces connecting, Shinji would feel the softness of her lips press against his, as he also pressed on to her. This kiss being much different from the one that he remembered. In this kiss, there was no indecisiveness. There wasn't anger, hatred, malice. There was a strange sense of longing, almost in a way of trying to understand, to see if the connection or the spark, if it existed at all. For Shinji, he could feel that spark. But then there was something else that he felt, because the moment he opened his eyes, what stood before him was an Asuka in a ripped and destroyed red plug suit. Her right eye was missing as blood drained down the side of her face as she looked at him wide-eyed, almost like that of someone who had seen death. Shinji's eyes also opened in terror as he looked to her, as Asuka simply said, "Why did you let me die, Shinji? You could have saved me, Shinji. Why did you let me die, Shinji? You could have saved me, Shinji. Why did you let me die? 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 Why did you let me die?" Shinji's eyes blinked before instantly Asuka would appear back before him again, only this time she was back to normal, at least how she was before they had started. Asuka looked at him shyly, Before feeling as though she had done something wrong, she quickly ran off to her room and closed the door. Shinji, feeling as though he might have upset her, he took a moment and sat back down in his chair with his hands in his head as he felt a sharp pain within his chest once again. He could feel it were the after effects of using over 100%. He could feel his body almost as if it were starting to reject him somehow. Only 2 more times, he thought to himself. If I go 100% 2 more times, it'll be the end of me. And barely a month had passed since he was given that warning, which meant he still had 6 more months until his body had completely adjusted from the time travel. Shinji knew that it was a race against the clock, not knowing what new tricks or dangers could be thrown his way. But he knew one thing was for sure. He had to survive. He had to make it, no matter what. As Shinji looked out the window, a rain would start to fall. A rain that washed over the city. For Shinji, he wasn't sure of what was going to be next for him, as all of these new elements continued to swirl and move around him all at once. But Shinji knew one thing that was for sure. He had come too far to stop now, and this was going to be a fight that he would see through to the finish. This concludes Neon Genesis Evangelion Redemption. What if Shinji went back in time? Book 1, Part 5. As always, if you enjoyed today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for Monday's video as we will be continuing Naruto Polaris as we go into Naruto Polaris Shippuden, What If Hanabi Hyuga Was Born First, Part 1. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.